This session is called Cultural Knowledge Civics with Language. Our presenters are Darius Coombs. He's a Mashpee Wampanoag, the Tribal Cultural and Outreach Coordinator for Education. He has 35 years of educating people on Wampanoag and other indigenous cultures. Darius understands the many ways individuals learn and utilizes a variety of approaches in his work. Paula Peters is a journalist, educator, and activist. A member of the Wampanoag tribe, she has spent most of her life in her tribal homeland of Mashpee, Massachusetts. She hails from a prominent Mashpee Wampanoag family, including Tribal Chairman Russell Fast Turtle Peters, her father, and was active in the tribe's long and contested push for federal recognition. And Dr. Nitana Hicks Greendeer is a citizen of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe and has worked for the past 15 years with the Wopanaak Language Reclamation Project as a teacher, researcher, curriculum developer, and head of school for the Wampanoag Language Immersion School. Witamu Katuanamu. Did I say that right? And she's a graduate of Mashpee Middle School.
Thank you, John. So my topic of speaking today is cultural understanding and disturbing stereotypes. And when I looked at this slide right here, I think that's pretty disturbing for our people. Take a look at it, guys. Maybe not so for some people, but for us as indigenous people, native people, it is. And we know that's a non-native person up there with a bonnet on, and those feathers are earned, are highly respected, and not to be joked about. And by this view right here, by other cultures, it's being joked about. So that's a serious thing right there. Next. Now this is a question we get quite a bit over the years, over time, hundreds of years. What are you? Now if you go back to the 17th century and before, you got the terms that are used, naturals. I guess that's more of a friendlier term than savage that was used back then. Although for the kids today, savage takes on a different meaning, right? My daughter says so, at least. Also heathen, that's what we were called, guys. Natural savages was used quite a bit in heathens. Today, people use the terms Eastern woodland. I've done talks, right? Before the Pilgrims arrived here, you heard the terms. You as teachers know these terms. Okay, they're fishermen and traders. Yeah, we know this. We know the Dutch, we know the English, we know the French came here. But when I do my talks, you have to include enslavement. You have to say there was traders, fishermen, and enslavers. This is not something I'm making up myself. This is from their own writings, their own documents. And a lot of teachers come up to me and say, what's the best way to teach history? Tell the truth. Deliver the truth. Deliver the truth in a manner that people will understand and will get. Okay, to the level of degree you're teaching. And so there was enslavement. You had Gomes enslaving over 100 slaves in 1525 in Narragansett. You had Thomas Hunt in 1614 taking 20 indigenous Patuxet Wampanoags and Nassau as slaves over to France and England. That was happening before the Pilgrims arrived here. Now, when was enslavement happening on our homeland here? The first sign of enslavement on our own homeland was down in Connecticut, right? After the Pequot Massacre. I'm not gonna call it a war because it wasn't a war, it was a massacre. 1636, 1637. And what they did down there to those people down there is they didn't want to enslave the Pequot in their own homeland because if they did this, they're more likely to escape. So let's trade with these people, let's trade for African Americans, and they're less likely to escape. And that's the first sign of slavery here. And that happened a lot after the war, okay? We all know about that first war, the King Philip's War. Most people killed per capita still in New England today. Next. How much for the ceremony? We don't sell our ceremony, guys. We have our traditional leaders that I learned quite a bit from and are here today, who's taught quite a bit over the years, and they learned from their elders. And that's not for sale. This is a woman called Grandmother Drum. I think she's still out there. She came to our parts back in 2011, and we kind of stopped her for doing what she was doing. It wasn't cool. So I know she does still out in other parts of the country, but not around here anymore. Our ceremonies are sacred amongst our people. It's gifted, and it's not there to be sold. Next. Now I did a study back, a few years back, right? About 5 years ago. I heard, I said Native people weren't allowed to do their ceremonies, our people. I'm thinking, where'd I get this from, right? I wouldn't be saying it if it wasn't true. I was saying, okay, the 1630s, this happened. So I looked at Plymouth court records, I looked at Mashpee court records, right? To find out when this happened. There wasn't much in the 1630s, but you go all throughout the 17th century, right? It got worse and worse amongst our people. This law came out from Mashpee, which is Boston, November 4th, 1646. It is noted by court that no Indian at any time powwow or perform outward words to their false gods or their devil on any grounds to the English. They shall pay 10 pounds. And I asked the English scholar, what does that mean for you guys, 10 pounds back then? They go, well, he said, Darius, that's half a person's salary. So what that says to me, we weren't encouraged to do our ceremonies anymore. And so we lost quite a bit. We hold on to quite a bit, but our ways of doing things weren't encouraged to be done. And when you include the ceremonies, you include the songs. And this is part of your Google Classroom too, guys. The Plymouth Court records, it's all digitalized. And that's all I did was punch in the word Indian, and all these laws and records show up. But unfortunately, you see the slow decline. Next. Offensive terminology. How much Indian are you? I think we're one of the only cultures around the world that people ask that question. How much are you? Well, how much percent are you? We don't go by that. We go by how much culture we got inside of us, how we're raised, how our elders teach us, how our parents teach us, how our uncles and aunts. And it all starts inside the household. I'm very close to my family. And anybody knows me knows that, Are you warlike or peaceful? I don't know how much these terms are used anymore, but you just don't wake up in the morning, right? Oh, geez, I'm warlike. Where's my bow and arrow? I gotta go kill somebody today. You can't describe any culture around the world as being warlike or peaceful. It's not a hobby, It's not a way of life, especially for our people. There's reasons to go to war and reasons to stay at peace. How come you don't look like a real Indian? Well, a lot of what people know about indigenous people is the old movies. John Wayne didn't do anything positive for our people over the years. Okay, unfortunately, he didn't. And a lot of people compare the Native people, indigenous people out west to how we are out here. And no, we don't look the same because we're different people. But I can tell you, because I'm Mashpee Wampanoag, I lived in this community for quite a number of years. There's probably 70 communities amongst our people, right? And amongst Mashpee, you can look at these families. I can look at the Mills, right? I can look at the Greens, I can look at the Hendricks and see that distinguished look in their face of that family trait. And that's true. I'm a Coombs myself, and people might say that about my family also, which is a strong name. Do you like Columbus? No, I don't. And that's for obvious reasons what he did over time. The killing and when Linda Coombs speaks after lunch, guys, she did a study on Columbus, and so did Earl Mills Jr. to my left, exhibit up in Boston, Children's Museum. And his priest, I can't recall his name right now, but wrote what Columbus was doing to the people, indigenous people down south. The true history. And we'll get you that name before the day is out to look at his research. Not research, but his observations, what he was doing down there. Do you know he discovered America? No. And the final term you see there, guys, is our Indians. Our Indians, right? I hear this still sometimes, especially I'm traveling different areas around the country. Our Indians. Now I'll ask them, how many do you own? And it's people say that, right? They're so used to saying it. Our Indians is ownership term, right? You don't own those people. Those people are their own entity, their own people. Or my Indians. No, they're not nobody's Indians. They're their own people. So it's things like that. It's very important to teach in the classroom, and you're getting a very small taste of it today of these presentations we have, which is tremendous. So keep on doing the research and keep on bringing us out there. We want to visit your schools, get out there. Like I was saying, if you heard me before, we're developing a speakers bureau for you guys, for the indigenous presenters and non-indigenous presenters on indigenous subjects. We're still here, we haven't gone anywhere. There's over 12,000 of us, well, we go back over 12,000 years. And the reason I say we are still here, because a lot of people think we're out, and there's no need to name people living on the East Coast. And there's plenty of us here. Back in 1830, the president at that time, Andrew Jackson, did the Indian Removal Act, right? And he forced, that's known as the Trail of Tears by the people down there, right, down south. But those people were forced out from their homelands. Those people came to our area too. A very highly respected elder of mine, Ramona Peters, was telling me the story. How'd that work, Ramona, when they came around here? She said, yeah, they were ready to remove us too, Darius. I go, so why didn't they? There was one non-native voice that spoke up. And I want to say his name was John Quincy Adams. He spoke up and said, if you remove these people from their homeland, they're gonna die. And the reason they're gonna die is they rely on seafood on their diet. And that one non-native voice they listened to, and they left us alone. So, next. We have tribal allies. This is one of our congressmen. Next. It's important to have allies like that. Congressman Keating. And I bring this up because, like I said, we know we're here. We know we haven't gone anywhere, but we want to make sure people know that too. Okay, we have conferences. We have Yousef. We do things like you see here going on today. Back on about 10 years ago, we produced a machine, the Wampanoag people, and we brought it down to the National Museum of the American Indian, okay, down in Washington, D.C. And it was put on the exhibit. And the idea came up, let's just bring a boat down there, because we didn't see one down there. And they accepted it. But it took on a life of itself. The story hit the AP, Associated Press. And the Congressman Keating, where are you, John? You ready? Spoke on this in the House of Reps, okay? And what that boat means to us as presents for being on the East Coast. Next. Did we lose that slide? We go back? Back? One more? One more? No. But, okay, I think we lost that slide. Okay, next. What Congressman Keating stated pretty much was, it's not just a machine that's coming down here to Washington, D.C., but it's the presence that indigenous people are still here on the East Coast. Okay, want to give that to John? Okay, let me see. There you go, John will repeat it. Actually, I found the quote right here. Thank you, Jose. And part of the quote reads like this, and we're going to have the full quote in the House, being a House Reps on your Google Classroom. John, go right ahead.
The Wampanoag people have played a role in our nation's history since the arrival of the first European settlers. It was their advanced agricultural and survival skills, including their expert craftsmanship as exhibited in the durability of the Mashpee, that allowed many of these new arrivals to survive the harsh New England winters. In Massachusetts, we continue to celebrate the historical and surviving role of the Wampanoag in our culture through permanent exhibits. It is only fitting that the Mashpee vessel of both economic and symbolic importance be properly displayed.
Thank you, John. That's just part of it, guys. We'll have the full speech in the Google Classroom, uploaded for you guys. Now, this right here, oral tradition, these guys look familiar to me. I see one right now. I see, and that's one of our chiefs right there, Earl Mills Sr., Flying Eagle. It was great to hear him speak the other day. But these two people are our leaders still today. And we listen to our oral story, we listen to our elders, we listen to our parents and aunts and uncles, which is very important. We all can read and write, we know this. But carrying on this oral tradition, oral stories are very, very important, guys, and that still goes on today. What I'm going to leave you with is this final slide, guys. I'm going to bring Paula up here. Culture and family, very, very important amongst all cultures around the world. I've taught pre-K, I've spoken at Harvard University, right? And what I get most out of a lot at the time, believe it or not, is teaching elementary kids, like 3rd, 4th graders. And one of the final things I'll leave them with, right? We make dolls. A lot of our dolls are deer skin and corn husk. A lot of times we don't put faces on our dolls. Now tell the kids, what makes this different from a regular doll? Well, it's not made from plastic. And, oh, it doesn't have a face. And a lot of the time, the reason we don't put faces on our dolls is because we don't want to raise our kids treating people differently just the way they look. We all come from one race, being the human race. There's good and bad in everybody, right? But I said, hey, Sarah, if little Ted falls down, you're going to help him out? Should we respect each other? Should we look after each other? They're like, yeah. And they get it at that age, which is cool. Thank you, guys. Good job, Dad. All right, we got Paula Peters coming up. And inside your gift bag, guys, we gave you a signed book by Paula Peters. Personally signed book, so.
Kabatash, Darius. You didn't tell him how there was actually 2 Mashoons that were made for that museum. Remember the first, what happened to the first one? That was courageous, though. That was really courageous. Anyway, I was asked to come and speak to you guys today about this effort that produced both a book and a documentary film back in 2016. And this came from really my passion for storytelling, which I learned as a young person from my father, who was a consummate storyteller. And then I was really, I grew up watching the news. As a little kid, if someone asked me what I want to do when I grow up, I would say, I want to be Barbara Walters. I just love Barbara Walters. I love that she knew so much. I love that she, would tell these stories with such passion, and, I just believed her. It turns out she was right like 90% of the time, or more. But that's what got me engaged in journalism. Many of you know I spent a long career in journalism before I went out on my own to do writing on my own and producing things on my own. Because old journalists never die, we just find another way to tell our story. So that's how Mashpee 9 came about. Actually, I was thinking about it. I was a teenager when this incident happened, and I was looking around my community, and the people who were engaged in the story were still there, all but one, and they were getting older. And I thought, geez, no one has written this stuff down, and if we don't write it down, capture it somehow, it's going to disappear. And I didn't know how they'd feel about it, so I started going around the community and talking to Chiefy and Bruzzy and other folks that had been there at the time. And I said, well, how would you feel about us recording your thoughts on this and your memories? And they were all game for it. So I started to do some research. You can go to the next slide. And the reason why I felt like this was an important story was because there was this great cultural injustice that occurred back in 1976. And we were coming on 40 years. In 2016 was 40 years since that happened. So it was kind of like a 40th anniversary retrospective on this. And just to quickly recap what happened, there were a group of tribal members who were down at Mashpee Pond throughout the day, celebrating, coming together as family, as Darius talked about. We come together as family a lot. And we celebrated throughout the day, feasted, and then later into the evening, Some of the drummers and singers had stayed and were still drumming and singing in a tradition that's called a 49. That's a familiar term to all of us, but it wouldn't be to you guys because say 49 what? And for our people, it's a tradition of you just keep singing and keep playing the drum, and it just, it really fuels the spirit. So they had been doing that into the evening. There was also a lot of other things going on in the community, but I'll get to that. At about midnight, or around about that time, a virtual SWAT team of police coming from 6 or 8 different communities on Cape Cod and Mashpee descended upon this group. Many of them then had even crawled into tents and were falling asleep. They were grabbed, arrested, those that didn't run fast enough, and beaten and thrown into police vehicles and hauled away. 9 of them were arrested, actually 10, but they had to let one young man go because he was actually only about 14 years old, I think. And the men who were arrested were then dragged into court the next day. It was just a horrific scene. I don't give the story away or the book away by telling you that ultimately they are exonerated, completely exonerated. This story is about how they become exonerated. This is about how the community came together, and it is about holding the community, the police and the community at large responsible for how they treated us. This was a major cultural injustice. Next slide. So, as I promised, I'll get to a little bit of background. This came about in 1976, and some of you probably, can you guess, what was the important celebration that was going on in 1976? It was the bicentennial. It was the bicentennial of the United States. There was fireworks going off. There was celebrations going on everywhere. And the Wampanoag in Mashpee were celebrating our heritage as well. And we had gotten a grant that enabled us to produce this longhouse and another frame on property that's just above Mashpee Pond, where it is now. It's all overgrown now. It's gone. So there was a lot of cultural pride going on. And there was an education program that was taking place at this location. And so the young people, the children were, the tribe was being culturally reinvigorated at this time. And it was also a time when we were realizing as a tribe that we were losing our base. Between 1965 and 1975, the population of Mashpee went from about 800 to 2,500. And all of that growth, just about all of it, would have been non-tribal growth. The tribe went from being dominating in town boards and town management to suddenly the town selectmen and boards were dominated by non-native and primarily development interests in Mashpee. So that became something that was really frightening to the tribe. And the tribe was working on ways to try and recover land. It is, in fact, about that time period when the town was convinced to turn over this parcel of land, which we call 55 acres. It's actually more than that, but they were convinced to turn over this portion of land to us, but that really was not going to be enough. We realized that we were in trouble of maintaining our cultural land base that was promised to us, by the way, forever, and was taken away as a result of township being forced upon us back in the 1800s. So yeah, there was kind of some dust-ups happening here and there, but nothing to the degree that we would expect to have our men brutally beaten and hauled away for the purpose of essentially beating the drum. Go to the next slide. So yeah, people got they got really upset about this. This is it's one of my favorite photos. We don't have a lot of photos from that time. It wasn't like, you know, today you whip out your phone, you document everything. But I love this photograph because it really speaks to how upset these people were. You know, it was a total affront to us culturally. Next slide. But we all came together. This happened in July of that year. This is another one of my favorite photos. This was taken at Christmas time, and the community and the Mashpee Nine themselves, which several of them are in this picture, came together to fight this. They were not going to take this lying down, and this was a gathering that they had at Christmas time at June's house, and as you can see, the Christmas tree, and people are looking, you know, really, really empowered here in this picture, and there's a good reason for that, and that's the guy that's sort of sitting in the middle, Lou Gerwitz. Go to the next slide. This fellow came into our lives at that period of time. He had learned about what had happened to the Mashpee Nine, and Lou Gerwitz was a really, really brilliant attorney. He lived up in Cambridge, but had not really been that familiar with the tribe, but he had worked for other tribes within the American Indian movement, and he learned about what was going on in Mashpee, and he came down, and he basically gave his services in exchange for a cot to sleep on and some ham and bean suppers, whatever we could raise. And he stood by these guys until the very end. Ultimately, another thing that came out of his counsel to these men was, you know, he really empowered them to believe in themselves and to believe in our cultural value. And when they went into the court in Barnstable to testify, they were able to swear not on the Bible, but on a traditional pipe. And that was the first time that that was ever done in this country. So it was a whole different mindset in that courtroom. And I think pretty progressive for 1976. Actually, that was 1977. Next slide. So like I said, I felt like that story was disappearing, and you know, I actually found out I was not wrong. Back in 2014, when I first started to research this story, I went to try and Google Mashpee Nine, nothing, nada. There was actually one story that existed in Harvard University magazine, and that was the only thing that I was able to find after deep digging. I went to the courthouse to look for the records of the trial. It was a precedent-setting trial, so there should have been something left. The district attorney's office and the courthouse, they had only the filing, and that they were found not guilty. Nothing in between. I think that the case might have been a bit embarrassing to the justice system, but it was an important case. It was really, really critical, and you know, preserving that was really important. So I asked the community to come together, and the Mashpee Nine, and this is a photo of one of our first gatherings was at my brother's house, and you know, we came and we talked about it. It was really great to hear the men talk about their experience. And as hard as it was, they were able to laugh and say, oh, do you remember this and do you remember that? And you know, my hair was stuck to my head when I walked in the corner because they wouldn't give me a hairbrush and I must have looked like this. And they laughed about it because they're survivors. They're warriors and they're survivors. And the important thing about the way that that story was captured is, and go to the next slide, we did this with our community and our young people. The young people were just blown away by this, because up to that point, you know, even though some of them had heard about it a little here and a little there, they didn't know really what had been sacrificed for their privilege of being able to beat the drum and to dance and to sing in our own voice. And they were just really, really thrilled with that and honored to be part of this community as a result of knowing this story. It was really, really important. So it wasn't just for the 9 that I was telling the story. It was for the community, and it was also for you guys. I didn't just, even though I admit that this story is told from the Wampanoag perspective, I also told it from a journalistic perspective. I went to the police station. Our now town manager was the chief of police at the time. He was very welcoming. He did reach out. He wouldn't give me the names of the officers that were there at the time because there was, you know, rules against that. But he reached out personally to those that he knew. They were all retired. And we did try to get a hold of them to speak on their behalf. I spoke to 2 of the police officers. One did not want to be on screen or quoted in the book at all, but he did give me his side of the story. And another police officer, Officer Costa, did give me his story for the book, but not for the film. So, like I always say, book is always better than the movie. Thank you. You can start going into these. These are just some pictures of the 9 that I captured there. Kevin didn't want to be his picture in the book. Oh, this is so dark. Yeah, he said, nope, I'm not having my picture in there. So he's the only one that doesn't have a picture in the book. You can go on to the next one. And there's Brad, and he's with our medicine man, Guy Cash. Next. Oh, I know that guy, yeah. Chiefy was really, really incredibly helpful and generous. Everybody was very generous with their stories. And really, without them being able to express themselves in the way that they did, they felt comfortable and they were able to do this. This is now preserved for generations to come. Thank you very much. Go to the next one. This guy, my heart. Bruzzy was usually the one too who would be, if somebody asked me to come and speak about Mashpee 9, Bruzzy would be like, yep, I'm coming with you, I'm right there with you. And I feel like he's standing right here next to me, maybe with a volleyball or something, getting ready to spike me, because this is where I last saw him. And it's sad that we lost him last year, but I'm so grateful that we have his story, and he was just so incredibly passionate about it. So we miss him terribly. Go on to the next one. And his brother, this is not Dougie giving an autograph, but he was, Doug Pocknet helped immensely in putting the film together and doing the good work. Next one. Billy Pocknet, a lot of you folks, I don't know why Cousin Gina is so prevalent in this picture. She shouldn't be, but it was the only picture I could find of Billy. And of course, he's wearing one of the shirts that are ever popular around the community. How many of you have seen this shirt somewhere? It's good to know. And Lincoln, who I was really kind of disappointed that we couldn't get Lincoln to come home. We even offered to buy him tickets. He lives out in Washington State now, but his story is actually the one that opens the book, Mashpee 9, his recollections of what happened. Next one. And Sonny. Sonny is actually not, or was not, a member of the tribe. He was part of our family, though. Everybody knew Sonny. He got wrangled up with everyone else because, of course, he was like a cousin. He was a brother to a lot of these men, and he was out there with the best of them, and he got thrown into jail like the best of them. And I think that's oh, no, these are kind of cool. So here's the community really embraced this, and the t-shirts went to Falmouth Road Race, the t-shirts went to powwows, next one. And they're worn pretty proudly around the community. I think that's my last picture, right? I have one more? Oh, these two kids, they're really cute. So young and old are now wearing that pride. So I think that's, I'll be happy to answer questions later, but I want to make sure I give Nitana plenty of time. I will let you know that I have on numerous occasions offered the book and the film to the Mashpee School Department. Crickets. Thank you.
Isak, Nachasuis Nitana, Nitomas Masibiat, Kunipiamu, Momikimau. Hi everyone, I'm Nitana. I'm from Mashpee, and welcome everyone. Thanks for being here today. So I'm going to talk about how we have kind of brought our culture to our youth mostly, although many different sort of subgroups of our tribe through language. And I know many of you have heard me or others talk about this before in the past, but so bear with me through a little bit of background first. So the Wampanoag Language Reclamation Project, which is the organization that houses and funds our language school, was founded in 1993, and it was founded as a way, as a 501c3 to bring back our language. It is a collaborative project of all of the 4 communities of the Wampanoag Nation: Mashpee, Aquinnah, Herring Pond, and Assonet. And prior to the return of our language in 1993, the language hadn't really been spoken fluently by anyone for about 150 years, which is approximately 6 generations. And so here we are now in the 7th generation working to bring it back to our people. And I think, so here in that first bullet point, you see the word Wampanoag, and that specifically means Wampanoag language. But sometimes you may also see it written, like in the header there, wopanaak, and sometimes we use that to mean Wampanoag language as well. That is our spelling for the word Wampanoag. Of course, as we live and work on Cape Cod, we see all sorts of signs that are in Wampanoag, right, for place names and things like that, and we'll talk about place names again in a minute, but most of these words that you might all be familiar with, like Mashpee or Sipawisset, Katuit, right, these are all Wampanoag words, but the spelling has sort of mangled them, and so they're not, the spelling is kind of all over the place, and so we've standardized the spelling, and it looks a little different than what you might be used to seeing. So a little bit more about Wampanoag language. So it's the first language to be revitalized from no living speakers, which is not an easy thing to do, as you can imagine. But we have some really great resources available to us. One is an incredible amount of documentation of Wampanoag language. We have the first Bible that was ever printed in the Western Hemisphere, was printed in Wampanoag. We also have copious deeds, wills, personal letters, and things like that that are in archives all over New England and other places as well. And we also have sister languages that are still spoken. So we have Passamaquoddy, we have Penobscot, we have Ojibwe, Maliseet, Mi'kmaq. These are other languages that are sister languages to Wampanoag that we're able to draw from as well. And so with all of these resources, as well as having the benefit of some trained linguists working on our project, we have been able to bring Wampanoag back into a language that people are using as part of their daily lives now. Thank you. And so I just wanted to talk, before I sort of talk about what we're doing to put this in practice, some of what is gained by having our community understand and learn Wampanoag. And so the first thing I wanted to talk about is animate and inanimate nouns, and how they help us to understand our culture, and how it helps us to understand what we knew historically, right? Without having access to our actual ancestors, we can sort of know what they knew. And so Wampanoag is split up into animate and inanimate, and it's what we would call gender, right? Linguistically, what we would call gender. So in English, right, we have male and female, right? But we have animate and inanimate in Wampanoag. And so most things are inanimate, but we have some rules for what would make something animate. And if a noun basically falls under one of these 7 categories, then it's considered animate. And the categories are that it gets around on its own, right? So that's like your people and animals, basically. That it, oh gosh, now I'm putting myself on the spot to actually remember them. One rule is that it's used in ceremony. One rule is that it's part of a creation story. Another rule is that it restricts the movement of another animate. So that might be something like a net, or a boundary of some sort, even though that's abstract, right? That would restrict movement. Another rule is that it causes direct movement of something else. So the wind, or a paddle of a canoe, right? That's causing direct movement. That was 6, right? Or that was 5. One is that it has an animate parent. So, of course, that's, people, right? But it also could be things like bricks, right? Bricks are considered animate, and we know this in some of our documents because they put an animate ending on them, even though the word in the documents are bricksock is what it says. But clay is animate, and so clay, being the material that makes a brick, would make a brick animate. And the last thing is that it allows something can be animate if it allows something else to move in a complete circle. So, for example, an axle, right? So it's not the wheel that's animate, but the axle would be animate because it's allowing something else to go in a whole circle. So, of course, nobody wrote down these rules for us, right? So we've had to sort of, do the research and figure out what is it about these things that are animate, what do they have in common, right? And this is the list that we've come to. And, maybe 50 years from now, we'll discover an 8th rule, or maybe we'll realize that, there's something else about these things, that maybe this rule it's not what we thought it was. So it's an evolution always. But some of these things give us a really good picture of what Wampanoag people knew. For example, astronomy, stars and moons, for example, are animate. The sun is not animate. So our understanding as Wampanoag people is that the stars and the moons were moving where the sun was not, right? So that helps us to get a sense for, why we might do certain things or how we were able to operate in our environment. Pine trees and sea foam is another example of things that are animate, and those are our ancestors, right? We are people of the water and of the land. And pine trees and sea foam specifically are our great-great-great-great-grandparents, and they're animate, right, as part of our creation stories. Place names is another thing that I talked about briefly a second ago, but we have all of these places around us that we see the signs for all the time, whether they're towns or street names. And when looking at these signs, right, often we probably don't really think about what these places are or what these places mean. But here's a few examples of local places, right? Ashumit, Santuit, Katuit, all places that are, a quick drive from here. And they have very specific meanings, right? So Ashamuat is the place of the spring. Santuit, Sonkimuet, the place of the sachem, the place of the leader. And Katuat is a talking place. And so this, again, allows us to understand like what was our land used for? What were we doing there? What was happening in these places? And you know, all of this is true for all of these other places. These place names have very specific meanings that tie us to this place, that tie us to our history, and the things that have happened on this land for, as Darius was saying, thousands of years. And then the last bullet here is just sort of my little anecdotes for some things that I've learned that are some stories that I like to tell about my learning of Wampanoag. And so the first one, ta-ta, in Wampanoag, that means I have no idea. You say that if someone asks you a question and you like really are like, beats me, like ta-ta. And that's something that some people still say. Some Wampanoag people around town still use that. They use it a little bit differently. You might call somebody that, like if they're kind of dense. But it, you know, it comes from that same, you know, from our language, and it's something that's remained. This other one, Chikwanapash, this means, well, actually, I'll tell you what it means after. So my dad had hunting dogs, like my whole life. We grew up with hunting dogs. And always, when I was a kid, I could remember that if they were barking at night or something and he wanted them to be quiet, he always told them, keep still. And I always sort of thought that was funny, and I didn't really like think about it like to ask him why or anything, but I just always thought like, they're barking, they're not jumping, right? Why are you telling them to keep still? But this word, Chikwanapash, it means be quiet and it means keep still. And so, you know, I don't think he knew that, but what had retained from the meaning of this word for him was keep still rather than be quiet. And so I just, you know, there's lots of little stories like that or little examples like that where Wampanoag has remained, even if we didn't really realize it. So a little bit of what we are doing with the Wampanoag Language Reclamation Project. The main thing is classes, right? So we try to get as much Wampanoag language out into the community as we can. And our teachers, sometimes they're only just 1 or 2 steps ahead of our students, right? So as we're learning, we're really trying to turn that over so that the entire community is learning together as much as possible. One of our more popular classes that we teach are the elders classes. Those happen specifically for elders twice a week, although COVID has put a little bit of a damper on that because having to be remote has been hard. But for the elders, they learn a little, they come to Wampanoag language with a little bit of a different perspective than a lot of our younger learners, because many of the things like what we just talked about are things that they already know, right? But the language allows them to sort of fine-tune that understanding, right? And so it's a little bit different. For the youth, we're building that up as we go, right? So what's nice about that is that, you know, as an adult learner myself, you know, I've had so many like aha moments kind of in learning Wampanoag, because it's like, as you know, as I was saying, kind of put for me a little clarity around some things that I already knew. Whereas for our children, we're able to, you know, to give them that as a foundation, so that they are not having to sort of backtrack as they grow up. And so what we've done through our immersion school is to really keep language and culture as the foundation of what the children are doing. So not only are they learning about all of these cultural practices in school, but they're a given, right? So they're not an add-on after math and reading. They're as much a part of their day as those other academic subjects. And so, you know, for example, you know, we've had parents in particular of some of our students come in and, you know, on a whim say, hey, I just caught 3 ducks. I'd love to come in and help, you know, have the kids help me pluck them. And we've done things like that many times, you know, so the kids, you know, and they might be in the middle of, you know, their reading block for the day, but we stop and we bring this in because it's as important for our kids to learn how to be in their homelands as it is for them to, you know, to be able to read about it from afar later on. And that also gives them the understanding that they don't have to keep those things separate, right? So it doesn't have to be school over here and culture over here. Like, they can be the same thing. They can be as important as each other, which I think, you know, for you all as educators in mainstream schools, I think is very important to keep in mind, right? That when Wampanoag students, or any students from any culture for that matter, when they come to the doors of the school, they're not checking their culture at the door, right? It's coming in with them. And, you know, whatever it might be, it is as important as anybody else's culture in the door that might fit a little better, right? And so here's just some snapshots of some of the education environments that our kids find themselves in. A few of these pictures, the bottom left and the third one on the bottom, are actually photos of the students in the high school language classes. So again, we're trying to have as much cultural experience in as many places as our students learn as possible. It's very important to us as educators also, and as teachers of Wampanoag language to make sure that they have that in all places. And so what we're doing, what we're attempting to do, is non pisson pour non tamuonk, which is to decolonize. And so this word, non pisson pour ton, sorry, I messed it up that time, non pisson pour mon tamuonk, literally means the act of living right again. Right? So while, you know, we can push our students through, you know, whatever environments they find themselves in, what we're really trying to do is to set the foundation for them to know really like who they are, where they're coming from, through language, through understanding themselves and their communities. And here on the left, you can see the recitation that the students do each day. And so much like you know, the Pledge of Allegiance in a public school or place of work, these are some of the things that our students recite. And it's some values that we believe we commonly hold as Wampanoag people. So they are respect, honesty, compassion, humility, bravery, and gratitude. And so again, these are a part of what we are instilling in our children as part of a community. That's it. That's all from Mashpee.